Water Quality Management Committee meeting of Wednesday, May 22nd will come to order. The first order of business is discussion on how and when to define IA districts. Kristen is going to give a presentation.
So this is kind of the precursor of starting to think about how Falmouth wants to define IA districts as they move forward in watershed permitting. So what Chairman Rafferty wanted me to do was take a look at what other towns have done for their regulations.
Pull the microphone down a little bit more, I think. Yeah.
I don't want to. What other towns have done for their regulations to give basically some background information and ideas of what might be applicable, what might be useful for Falmouth. So I started looking regionally what other towns in our immediate region have done. So there are 5 towns that have IA regulations already adopted, already being enacted. It's Mashpee, Wareham, Westport, Marion, and Tisbury. Several of those towns have updated their regulations in recent years, and several have updated them progressively. So we'll go through each of them in there. Just some basic background, some of the examples of triggers that are outlined in the different regulations. These are the things Falmouth has been talking about as they were kicking around ideas previously, but they include new construction, increased flow, substantial improvement, system failure, a surface water boundary, cesspool replacements, and transfer of property. So substantial improvement is a kind of gray area. It has to be specifically defined. Falmouth has a formal definition in their zoning bylaws, which is if your construction cost is equal to or exceeds 50% of the market value of the building that's existing before the construction begins. Long Island is another one who specifically defines it. And their definition is more than 50% of the market value of the existing permanent structure. That does not include the value of the land. So that's how substantial improvement has been defined in these 2 very specific cases. So Wareham, they've had IAs included in their regulations since 2014. So they require upgrades for new construction or increased flow within 500 feet of surface waters. And it's upgrades for system failures if they're within what they call the water quality protection zone. So that's 150 feet from surface waters. And their IA performance standard is 19. Marion, their regulations came about in 2020. They require the upgrades for new construction, increased flow, and system failure. So they do not have, to my knowledge, defined IA district. That's townwide. Their performance standard is also 19 milligrams per liter. Within their regulations, they have an allowance for a delayed sewer connection. So meaning if you put an IA in, the life expectancy of your IA system is 20 years. So you pretty much have until that 20-year mark to connect to the sewer if it comes through. So if you put an IA in now and sewer comes in 5 years, you don't have to connect to that sewer for 15 years. In Westport, their regulations were 2022, so they have required upgrades for new construction and increased flow. They also have a townwide cesspool upgrade mandate, and that requirement is to upgrade the cesspool to Title V standards. And that mandate is supposed to be completed by 2026, but recently they extended that to 2028. So that's just a different way that they're dealing with cesspools. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be upgraded to IAs.
Kristen, could I ask a
Yeah.
definition? How do they know when there's increased flow?
The addition of a bedroom.
Oh.
So the addition of a bedroom, because that's how flow is
Presumed
determined.
increased flow, okay.
Yes. Or if it's a change in use for the property itself. So Westport, their performance standard is also 19, and they have the same allowance for delayed sewer connection that Marion did. Tisbury, they have the most robust IA regulations of the region. They started with their regulations in 2016, and they've revised them several times. So they are requiring upgrades in defined watershed districts for new construction, increased flow, system failure, and transfer of property. Their standards are set to be best available technology at most 13 milligrams per liter, or a 75% removal. So that is the criteria that's written into their bylaw. The regulations don't apply to any properties that are within an approved sewer area. Board of Health can do variances for those in a proposed sewer area, but in their regulations, when it comes time for town meeting to vote on that proposed sewer area, if it's voted down, anyone who has the variance has 12 months to upgrade their system. When Z. Crocker was here, talking about the Shubal Pond project, he had a note in his presentation that said Tisbury's considering another amendment to their regulations to include a surface water boundary of 1,000 feet. I assume that's personal communication that he's had out with Tisbury or with John Smith, because that's not in any draft regulation that I've seen. I did reach out to some of the towns just to get some more information. Tisbury, the health agent said that they currently have 104 IA installations out there. 15 got installed last year. So far this year they have 5, but within their watershed district, for properties that are slated for IA upgrades, it's about 1,500. Mashpee again had their regulations in 2000, and they've revised twice, most recently last year. So the most recent revisions extended the surface water boundary. So now the required upgrades are within 1,000 feet of the surface water for new construction, increased flow, which again means the addition of a bedroom usually, and system failure. They have a performance standard for residential for 19 milligrams per liter and 25 milligrams per liter for commercial properties. Their health department hasn't really kept good records of how many IA installations have occurred because of the regulations. And I looked at their maps for where their 1,000-foot boundary is, and it looks like there's about 2,200 parcels in there. And they have nothing in their regulations about if you're in a proposed sewer district, if there's any kind of potential variance or grandfathering that might happen with that. So the table's hard to read, but it basically just kind of puts the check near the different triggers for what the towns are requiring, just to put it all in one spot. This is not just a Cape Cod issue, so there are other areas that have IA regulations already in place. As I was looking for regulations here, a lot of Florida popped up. So the state of Florida just passed a House bill in 2023, which is similar to the Title V revisions that just happened here in 2023. So these regulations require upgrades to new construction on a lot less than 1 acre in an impacted area. So all of these light blue, these are the impacted watershed areas. So any new construction on a lot that's less than 1 acre has to put in an IA. The Indian River Lagoon, so that's the coveted watershed. They have their own requirements. Starting January of this year, all septics on all lots have to be upgraded by 2030 or connected to the sewer if it's available. So that's this whole pink area over here. For Florida, the performance standard for an IA is 65% removal. State of Florida, along with a lot of other states, rely on the third-party the National Standard Institute testing, which is third-party testing where they certify what the performance value for different technologies is. So a lot of states rely on that and accept those results. So 65% removal through that third-party testing facility is acceptable for Florida. Within that bill, it also requires local government to have a plan to provide sewer service within a 10-year planning deadline for any development that's more than 50 lots and more than 1 septic tank per acre. So that covers some of your apartment buildings, your condos. So that was all written into that bill. Long Island, they have a county regulation. So Suffolk County is the east end of Long Island. So these were enacted in 2021, and they require IAs for new construction and substantial improvements. So remember, the substantial improvements are constructions that exceeds 50% of the market value of the existing permanent structure on that lot. They do have exemptions for parcels that are in proposed sewer districts. Their performance standard is 19, and they already have their county health department is already serving as their responsible management entity. Some of the towns down there do have some of their own, which just build on further to some of these regulations, but this is countywide. Out in California, another countywide regulation, Los Angeles County. So they require upgrades within 600 feet of an impaired water body, and their performance requirement is at least 50% reduction. They also have a trigger that if your depth from the bottom of your leach field to the groundwater, if it's less than 5 feet but at least 3 feet separation, you have to put in an IA. There's also a bunch of criteria about depending what system you're using and what other components and what your perk rates are, whether you need an IA or not. In California, if you're in an impaired watershed and that watershed also has a TMDL for bacteria, in addition to the nitrogen reducing IA, you have to put a disinfecting component on with the system as well. So that's part of their regulations. Statewide, their requirements also talk about systems within 600 feet of impaired waters. But like here with the Title V revisions, if you have a watershed permit, your local plans supersede that state regulation. So out there, the local plans and the local regulations supersede. Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, so they require best available technology for new construction, building additions that require septic upgrade. So these are from their regulations. So again, that's basically additional bedrooms. Repair or replacement of existing systems for systems located in what's termed critical area. Critical area is land within 1,000 feet of tidal waters. So not just Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay as a whole, there's about 52,000 systems located within 1,000 feet of tidal water. Maryland requires a performance of at least 50% reduction, but Maryland uses an effluent concentration of 60 milligrams per liter, meaning they're only requiring a 30 milligram per liter performance value. So that's kind of the rundown of what's been done so far in other areas and some of the updates of what people are adapting to with the regulations, just as a starting point.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open this to comments, but please keep in mind that this has been an informational presentation, so comments of the form, well, that's stupid, we should do it this other way, make no sense, because no one is saying that we're doing it this way. But if somebody has a question about it or wants to point out that in Wisconsin they use zebras, that's okay. So I'll start from the right.
Okay, that was excellent, as always, Kristen, great research and a lot of very, very useful data. One of the questions I think in further researching this would be, what are some of these towns in the state of Florida, state of California using for what we refer to as an RME? How are they monitoring the performance of these IAs, or are they at all going forward? I know when Mashpee, when I met with a bunch of town officials, including the health agent and the town manager a few months ago to talk about urine diversion, at their request, I spent a couple hours with them. And I asked Zach, I can't remember his last name, who's the health agent, I said, so with your new reg, how many have you put in and what are the costs running? Mm-hmm. And he said, I've got no idea, we're not tracking it.
Right.
So, I mean, that was kind of appalling. I mean, it seems a pretty basic, how many have you issued a permit for and, what are people saying it costs? So I suspect they're not doing much in monitoring system performance, but I think that's a key question to ask in the next batch of communications with these entities. How are you dealing with performance to
So
standard?
realistically, on Cape, all of the inspection has to get reported to the county, and MassTech keeps all of that data. So that's reported to the county as opposed to individual towns, and then it's up to their boards of health how they want to address non-compliant systems.
So the question would start, at least on the Cape, to MassTech, what do you got for data from these systems? But also, you know, I think it'd be interesting if the research can find it. Okay, how is Florida monitoring the systems? Other places are putting in these systems with varying performance requirements, but rather than reinvent the wheel on RME-type data and what the Board of Health has to deal with,
Yep.
how are they doing it? And you know, that's a good starting point, whether we agree or not, to Steve's point, gives us some idea how they're doing it. And just the fact that, you know, Tisbury has become very stringent in the trigger criteria. I think that's a great model. They have a couple of severely impaired areas, and they've really gone bam and said, do it now, starting now, and here are the triggers. Personally, I think that's a good model for us to look at. And, you know, how is Tisbury monitoring it? They gave you great data. And going forward, I think it's a model we should look hard at. So, my comments thus far.
I have a much smaller question. Why is Mashpee more lenient with commercial than residential?
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you know?
It's the Title V standard, it's in Title V.
Oh, I see. John?
My comments are a few. I think Steve Rafferty asked Kristen to put this together as a preamble to two discussions which we'll have at future meetings. One is with MassTech. They've had a grant to look at RMEs for about a year. And one of the things that we've done is to ask that they come and update us how they're thinking about how globally, as we begin to use IAs more widely, how we monitor them and report to DEP how they're doing. And so we're anticipating that future meeting. The second meeting after that is to sit down jointly with the Board of Health and review where they are with their IA program. And that our Board of Health has developed a set of home rule regs which are much more stringent than Title V. That Title V, when they put in IAs originally, were meant to be used in Zone 2s if people wanted to increase their flow to more than they were allowed on an acre. I can't remember quite what the number is. But they were not meant for nutrient removal in coastal ponds. And so the Board of Health has been trying to upgrade our home rule regs. And one of the things the state never did was saying, okay, after you've put in an IA in a Zone 2, these are the things that it's going to have to do in perpetuity. And what the Board of Health has said, if you put in an IA that has an approval letter of, say, 19 milligrams per liter, we're going to hold you to that, and we're going to ask you to report that. You're going to be made to report that annually. And if you no longer meet those criteria, you're going to have to fix it. That's not happening in most of the other towns. And the other thing which George Hoyfelder has done is in looking at the width of technologies that are available. There are a number of which have general use approval at 19 milligrams per liter. There are also a number, for example, the nitro system, that have provisional use at 11 milligrams per liter. And so what the board has done is George has taken all the county records, and we have, I don't know, 1,200 systems in Falmouth installed. And he's looked at those records, he's gone through, thrown out the bad numbers, of which there are lots, and basically put together a table which says, okay, and what they have done is they've said anyone who's applying for an IA in Falmouth has to get a letter from their engineer that says the client has been shown the data on the available technologies and their performance standards, and that they are then have to sign off and say, I've looked at the available data and I've decided to use this system, and I understand that I'm going to have to maintain it in perpetuity. And then George has put together a table, and I think it's basically color-coded now, that if you've got a green bar, it means that your system that you're thinking of choosing has met in a majority of the time what its approval letter says it's supposed to do. In other words, giving the applicant the best available knowledge about what these systems can do. And it's clear that we're trending to ask people to put in systems close to coastal ponds that do considerably better than the general use standard of 19. And we're going to be pushing that. And I think that's part of what we would like to chat with the Board of Health about. What are their next steps after putting, and they've had very good success once the homeowners have seen the spectrum of what's available in IAs. A lot of them have been choosing the best systems, and so I think I said at the last meeting, at the last Board of Health meeting, they installed approved 4 nitro systems. So I think the town is really tending in the right direction, but we need to sit down in a couple of meetings from now and chat about that, how we think the next steps should be. In other words, do we want to think now about going to a sort of a Tisbury sort of setup in Falmouth, and where one of the things we've been talking about, so I was going to talk about this in reports, but Steve Rafferty and I went out and sat down with MassTech last week and sort of giving them an idea of what we'd like them to chat about when they came to talk to us about RMEs. And I've lost my trend of thought.
Well, we can come back to it as the reports if you want.
Well, maybe I'll end up. So that's sort of the groundwork that I wanted to lay out about how we're thinking that we need to approach this as a town. Oh, I know where I was going. So we had, years ago, had a Horsley and Witten, when we were thinking about how to deal with Oyster Pond watershed. We had them analyze in a watershed with about 200 homes, what would happen if we dealt with them with a sewer, and what would happen with IAs. And as part of that, we put together an RME that has been used sort of as the pilot by MassTech to develop their future thinking. But we're now thinking that as we begin to put watershed permits together in Falmouth, rather than saying we're going to globally use IAs, a place like Fiddler's Cove represents probably a good point of departure for some place that we're never going to sewer, that it might be an ideal place for us to think, how can we best deal with this small watershed with IAs, and how might we, as a town, manage that watershed? So I think that's sort of where we're tending to go with that. That was all.
Tom?
No.
Gordon?
I guess I just have a question to follow up to that, which is what's the timing of when the Board of Health will make some of these decisions, like, for example, that distance to surface water versus when we're gonna be putting together our watershed permits? Like, is the idea that that happens first, and then we can put that in our
I think that
permits?
wants to happen together.
Okay,
In other words, I think this committee, in, say, thinking about Fiddler's Cove, is going to be thinking about what that is, and we want to do that in conjunction with the Board of Health.
Steve?
Yeah.
Can I ask John a question? Sure. John, did you say there's 1,200 systems in Falmouth or on the Cape?
I think there's 12, is there 1,200 in Falmouth? It's a lot. They've-
IAs?
Yeah.
Holy smoke.
I think
Fine.
it's the Cape. I think that that George Hoyfelter's database is for the Cape, but I'm not sure.
More than 1,200 if it's Cape-wide. I know it's at least 1,500.
Oh,
I'm not, I wouldn't bank on that, but it's a lot.
Can we, as a committee, get that report? And so we can start kind of just seeing what these things are? Or?
George, I'm sure when we sit down with the Board of Health, we can ask George to bring all of that data and put it together for us.
I think it would be instructive to just start getting our heads wrapped around what are we dealing with, what are the performances been, and, you know, how many systems there are, and where they are. I just had a thought, and it's something in the back of my mind, and it's probably gonna most appropriately in the new freshwater ponds bailiwick, but should this type of reg apply also to the area surrounding a freshwater pond? We know they're in trouble. We're talking about saltwater estuaries, that's our mandate, but what about the freshwater thing? I mean, it seems to me it would make sense, but.
That's certainly part of the mandate of that group now.
Mhm.
And I think the difference is that if you're on the upgradient groundwater side of a pond, then you want to think about doing something fairly substantial. If you're on the downgradient side of the pond, there's not such a drive to try and intercept nutrients. And I think that's something that as the pond group begins to think about how they want to approach that, it may be a totally different set of standards that get applied to the individual ponds than we're thinking about with the saltwater estuaries.
Steve Rafferty also once told me in a different context, I'm not absolutely sure of this, but that there are perhaps 0 freshwater ponds that are not in the watershed of an estuary.
That's an yeah.
I
Okay.
don't know if that's true, but, or a very small number. Any questions from the audience? Not speeches, questions? Go ahead.
Comment, not a speech. Corin Peterson from the Buzzards Bay Coalition. Brilliant job on this, Kristen. Great research done here. Really good questions with respect to monitoring the performance of IA systems, because you have to meet TMDL and water quality standards for impaired systems. Think of that as, you know, a very important thing the town has to think about. Also think about new construction on Title V systems right now are doing nothing to reduce nitrogen. So there's the new construction that's coming in that even at 19 milligrams per liter, you're getting more than 50% removal. But, you know, you would really want to worry about the existing systems and upgrading them to an IA system because you're meeting a TMDL. I guess what I'm trying to say is I would encourage the town, when you're talking to the Board of Health, is that new construction is just bringing new nitrogen in. It's just making your existing problem worse. So a regulation which requires 19 milligrams per liter is better than a Title V system. And George Hoyfelder, if he were here, would say it's not, the raw effluent is 60 milligrams per liter, as in Maryland, 19 milligrams per liter is like a 60% removal. So it is better than nothing. Stricter standards should be considered for existing systems if you're using IA systems to upgrade, to reduce nitrogen pollution for meeting TMDLs. So that was my only comment.
Okay.
Hilda Menke from Green Center. Just a quick comment. I think that all the people that live on a pond, no matter if they're in the upper or the lower, should have the same standard. Because the lower ones might not help that pond that they're on, it will help the next pond. There should be no difference in what's required of anybody living anywhere, because they're all contributing to some pond, some river, or the estuary.
All right, excellent. Let's move on to item number 2. Tom Duncan. Oh, I'm sorry. Paul.
Sorry, just a quick question. I noticed several of the towns have a target of 19 milligrams per liter. Some were not mentioned. Is that the standard? Is that the acceptable standard? And how does that relate to some of the technologies that are available? I mean, are they going to change that standard at some point in time so people can meet them? Are they going to lower it? Because all this is based on the 19 milligrams per liter. that
There are
was here.
certainly better systems.
I think that there are no systems approved for general use by DEP which have a higher standard than 19 milligrams per liter. And I'm sure historically, that's the reason those boards of health have settled on that. There are clearly technologies that will do dramatically better than that. And we're all working very hard to get enough of them installed
Right.
that we can get them general use approval. I believe that the nitro system will have enough systems in the ground and we'll have 3 years of data so that sometime in 2025, they will be able to get general use approval. So once the systems get better and get general use approval, that will make it so towns will probably go back and adjust the standards.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I asked Steve Rafferty to put this on the agenda because after our most recent meeting, I was kind of frustrated that we had been talking about stuff back and forth, a bunch of different things for several months, and we didn't seem to be moving the topic forward. Most of you know that both mine and Ken Foreman's major concern was about the ongoing pressure to have all of the traditional fixtures in a house removed before people
Tom,
could.
let's, maybe it's my fault for not setting the stage for this. I mean, the title of this item is further discussion of urine diversion participant criteria.
Right.
And the setting. I just wanted to make sure that the TV audience and others realize that we've just now shifted from IAs in general
Oh,
to
sure.
urine diverting toilets.
Right. Yeah, I was,
And in fact, let me also interject one thing that I was going to mention. On Monday night, the Select Board approved the memorandum of understanding with Mass Tech Center for the pilot study to the pilot study, if you can call it that, or the pilot prep study for urine diversion. The planning. Planning grant. Planning grant, right. Go ahead.
right, well, that's where I was headed with this. Now it turns out that Monday night, and I don't know any of the details of what happened Monday night, because I didn't know it was on the agenda. I'd like to hear if anyone feels competent to describe in detail what came out of Monday night's meeting.
It was just a vote. There was nothing technical at the meeting. They approved a detailed contract with specific subtasks for Mass Tech to do for the $80,000 that the Select Board had approved in the winter. And
Yeah.
we can go into the details of that perhaps at the next meeting, but it's beyond the scope of this meeting. But go ahead.
Well, I was just trying to make the point again that I think it's an onerous burden and it's gonna discourage participation if we require full replacement of traditional fixtures, and that's what I don't know, what I don't understand, and my question was, is how and when are these decisions gonna be made, and do we have any input into those decisions?
You do have input. The contract specifies a liaison group or a supervisory group consisting of, I think, the assistant town manager, possibly the town financial manager, a representative from this committee, a representative from the Fresh Ponds Committee, and I may have left somebody out. And Mastech, of course. And there has been one meeting of that group at which Mastech said they wanted all the toilets to be urine diversion, and it was pointed out that that could be prohibitively expensive to homeowners and deter people from participating. So the compromise was to disable all the toilets that the homeowner did not want to convert to urine diverting toilets. And because things could go south in any number of ways. The homeowner or the other members of the family could say, forget this, or they could say, this is wonderful. Or it could fail to win approval from the town, in which case the person would have sort of a white elephant. And returning a disabled toilet, a sealed off toilet, to normal status would be much less expensive than reinstalling a regular toilet that had been replaced by a urine diverter. So, but they felt that that compromise version, at least, was necessary to meet DEP criteria. And the other thinking was that who knows how long it will be before we get an answer from DEP. We didn't want to hold up this process until we got that answer, so we're doing the best guess at it.
Well, would there be any provision to allow participation by people that didn't disable their toilets, because you're still gonna collect valuable data, and it's the closest to real world we're gonna get?
It hasn't gone that far, John.
I'm now reporting on something which I was not firsthand knowledge of, but I believe there have been discussions with DEP that rather than thinking about urine diversion as an IA and putting it in that approvals sequence, to think about using urine diversion as a modification of Title V. And I don't know any more about that discussion than that, but that may, that indicates to me that at least DEP is thinking creatively about how they want to approach urine diversion. And that's all.
But that doesn't speak, I'm not questioning what you just said, but it, on their point, from their viewpoint, it doesn't addressing the TMDL unless you start talking nitrogen.
I'm not sure what that, where that will go, but I'm just reporting that I think DEP is thinking of separating urine diversion from the IA approval route and coming up with a new approval route specifically for urine diversion. And I think we just will need to let that develop until we hear more from DEP.
Can I, oh, go ahead.
If I may, anybody that didn't see the meeting, go on the community access television, and just past the 3-hour mark in the recording is when the town manager brought the topic of the intermunicipal agreement to the select board, which they unanimously approved. And to me, there were a couple of key things he said, and he did not get into the details and the nuts and bolts of the proposal. But he stated a couple of things that I thought were important, and to answer, Tom's query, he said, to start off, the goal is DEP approval of urine diversion as an IA for general use. That would be the goal of the project. They were approving only the planning agreement to spend the $80,000 that was allocated last summer or early fall.
December.
To, I think they actually voted it earlier than that, before town meeting even, the 80,000, but that's beside the point. That there was purely a vote to enter into the agreement to expend that $80,000 under the town manager and his staff's direction, with input from that advisory group that Steve mentioned. So the goal of the project is to be DEP approval of urine diversion as an IA for general use. They feel that because of budget constraints, and this was again his statement and I'm paraphrasing, they would only support putting IAs in impaired watersheds, nowhere else. The town would not financially invest in, urine diversion except in impaired watersheds, the zones that we're addressing. He mentioned a number that I don't know where it came from, of 60 minimum participations, with at least one urine diversion device to be installed, and that would be exclusive use of that device, to what you were just saying, Steve. That would be the only operable toilet in the participant's household. If you got 2, 3, 4 toilets, you can't use those somehow, and he said the details of how that would be administered need to be worked out.
Unless you choose to replace more than one. with your
Unless you
diversion.
choose to replace them all, but you would have to disable, somehow restrict access. No, exclusive toilet use in that house would be the urine diversion device. He mentioned that plumbing board approval of the devices is critical. Definition of the collection of the urine, how that would be done, is critical. And then he mentioned that there is an August 30th deadline for completion of that $80,000 planning study, whatever you want to call it. So that was his only bullet points of information to give guidance to the selectmen as to what he was recommending, and they did vote to, okay, go for it, do it. He pulled the trigger. But I think it was instructive that those were the specific goal he mentioned and some of the key parameters that he sees. And that's all, I think, obviously subject to change as MassTech develops the proposal and the advisory group consisting of someone from this committee and whoever else was in that going forward. So that, but it's probably 5 minutes if you go into hour 3, just beyond that on the recording of the meeting, you can hear him exactly, and any selectman questions. I think Selectman Brown was the only one to raise any question, and it was not, it was just about, well, we're only voting tonight as a select board to approve this study, not the entire project. And he said, yes, that is all we are voting on tonight.
Any other comments? Kim?
Yeah, so, Ed, you just said at the end of your comment that as MassTech continues to do the planning, and John was saying that DEP seems to be considering sort of having a more liberal approach to urine diversion and what the goals are and whether it's gotta be apples to an IA, or whether it gets treated as just another methodology for addressing nutrients reduction like aquaculture. My hope is that as the working group digs into this, that where we end up is there's a broad spectrum. There are people who replace all their fixtures, and there are people who don't. We know that the more oysters that get planted, the more nitrogen gets reduced. We know that the more urine diversion fixtures installed, the more nitrogen is diverted from our waters. It's not a theoretical technology, it's a proven technology. We also know that the more people who are doing urine diversion, whether it's one toilet or all their toilets, more people in Falmouth will learn about this technology, be educated about this technology. And we also know that if all of the participants are required to place all their fixtures, and at the end of the study, DEP gives general use approval, then it's general use approval only for people who replace all their fixtures or disable all their fixtures. So where does that get us? Where does that get us? So my hope is that as this working group gets engaged in this and works with DEP, and as John was saying, there are conversations that MassTech is having with DEP, and I detect movement. I detect sort of positive movement. So again, I hope that at the end of the day, that people can do whatever they want in terms of how many fixtures they replace, and maybe hopefully some will replace all. That might, that'll give certain data. But the more people who replace even one fixture, two fixtures, all fixtures, it's all data. It's more data. It's more data about what the what public acceptance looks like in Falmouth. We will learn. So I just hope that we don't end up with this restrictive, you gotta replace all your fixtures, because I think at the end of the day, we're gonna end up short, we're not gonna benefit as much. We're not gonna benefit as much as a town. Our waters aren't gonna benefit as much, and we're not gonna benefit as much financially. Because we know that the more people who use urine diversion, even one toilet in your house, that's nitrogen reduction. It's nitrogen diversion, and that's a good thing. And certainly for us on ponds, the more people, installing urine diversion appliance, the better. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Steve, I wanted to say one thing, this thing that John mentioned today about the state shifting it from treating it as equivalent to IAs, is with IAs, at least on paper, and it doesn't seem to be followed through in many towns, there is already a monitoring program in place. And so the data collection opportunity is there, regardless of how many systems in a house, how many fixtures within a house are converted. You'll be collecting data, and going forward, you'll know right away if someone is cheating on the system after they got excused from putting in a traditional IA to decide to go with this. You'd know right away. And you're gonna know how much urine is being diverted and do the mass balance from nitrogen at that end. So if they do switch to some sort of thing, I would definitely hope that the same sort of monitoring features are incorporated in their new way of looking at urine diversion.
Well, one of the subtasks for MassTech under this contract is to talk to DEP.
Yep.
Try to get something definitive from them.
Right.
So I'm Nancy Soul. I live in Hatchville on Deep Pond. And I'm just thinking of myself as a consumer. And I'm very interested and dedicated to really making a change. But I don't know that I would want to replace all my fixtures. I haven't had one. I haven't tried it.
Permanently or for a pilot study?
I'm sorry?
Permanently or for a pilot study of 3 years?
Even for a pilot study, because it makes a change in the house, and I haven't used one yet.
Well, no, I could understand it more for the pilot study. I would expect you to use the word even if you said permanently. That even if it had all been approved and worked and was a substitute for an in-ground IA, you still wouldn't want to do it to all your fixtures.
Well, I would want, but it isn't, there's two points that I want to make. One is that I would want to try it out before I changed my fixtures. I like the idea at least giving people the option of just disabling a toilet, but a lot of people won't. I would do that personally because I don't mind running up and down stairs to another toilet, but somebody else might. The other thing that I have a concern about is if DEP is if this sets a precedent that people have to change all their fixtures, it really limits it. And I'm thinking of, like, when we started doing recycling, look at how many, it took decades for people to do a broad sweep on that, decades. And if to just do a pilot study that allows for, that people have to replace everything all at once, how many people would have done that with recycling? I remember in the 70s, like, people weren't going to do that. And people are at different learning levels, and I just like to leave it open. And also, if it sets a precedent, that really makes a difference, because then we're leaving data out. The biggest issue is social acceptance. If you have one toilet and you have a toilet that is not disabled, you're going to find out something about how people use it. Isn't that valuable information, besides the removing how much nitrogen is being removed? So to me, flexibility matters. I'm not an all or nothing thinker, and I would hope that there would be more flexibility in this.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Can I make one more quick point?
Yes.
As a society, we're trying to get as many people as possible to use electric cars. We give people, if you buy an electric car, you get a rebate, you get a credit. Far fewer people would use electric cars if you said to them, we'll give you a rebate on an electric car, but you can't use any other car. You can only use electric cars. Far fewer people in this country would use electric cars. And to me, it's analogous to urine diversion. It's a proven technology. We know it works. We know it helps the environment. And we're giving people flexibility. So if they don't like their electric car, if their electric car battery, is empty, it's not charged, they can hop in their other car.
Greg Lauer, Hatchville. Just a couple quick points. One is, it seems to me that there's sort of maybe two issues that are sort of separable. One is getting the toilets, urine diversion toilets approved for use, regardless of whether you do one or more than one in a house. Just for people who want to be able to upgrade it just because they feel inclined towards trying to make an improvement, we'd certainly want to make sure that that happens. I'm a little concerned in the sense that if we get caught up in a comparison to, the 10 milligrams per liter for the nitrogen best, kind of alternatives, and we don't hit that with a urine diversion for just one or two out of a household, then I'd want to make sure that that's one of the things that can come out of this, is that it's approved for use in a partial setting. The second one is that I understand that the other part that we're really sort of interested in here is getting credit for these kinds of things in the watershed management plans. And I can see how you have to have an agreement on what the value is, what number are you going to put down. If we do 1,000 of these systems, how many milligrams are we reducing this by? And we want to get credit. And I can see that's a lot harder if you do partial. So it seems to me that you might want something which is a combination, where you have enough information collected that you can develop an algorithm that Mass DEP agrees on, that says, here's how much credit you get for installing complete urine diversion in a household. But I I would also like to have it be the case that at the end of the day, if somebody just decides they want to spend their own money and improve the quality of the water around their ponds, that it's legal and it's allowed. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Hilda?
Hilda Menge from Green Center. I want to emphasize again how important it is to use eco-toilets that are already approved. Right now, we are thinking that urine diversion is the same as urine collection. It's not. Urine diversion means keeping the urine out of the wastewater stream, and that is the goal. Incinerating toilets do that. And they should be part of this program. They're already allowed right now. People can do them tomorrow. There are some composting toilets that do that. The urine and the feces go in one same container and they get composted together. The urine is removed from the wastewater stream. The urine is not collected. And we're making we don't make that distinction here, and that's a very important one. Because we are after removing the nutrients from the wastewater stream. We are not into measuring how much urine we get. We did that, and we can do that. We could still have several that could do that. But that's not the goal. So the goal that Mass DEP had, as far as I know, is to measure the effluent from the septic tank and how much that is reduced. That's the only thing that I know they were interested in. They were not interested in knowing how much urine we collected. Now that's a nice scientific thing to do. I agree with that because we did that for 2 months and it's really valuable, but we don't need 50 of them. We need 50 people or fewer to divert the urine so that we don't have as many nutrients going into the system. So the composting toilets and incinerators should be part of this program and not be excluded. And I also hope that you all received the proposal that I sent out today with exactly what you were talking about, with the flexibility that is necessary. We did the other way 10 years ago, it doesn't work. Can you imagine changing 3 bathrooms? The stress that people would go through that, it's hard to change 1 bathroom. It's not reasonable. And the incentives are not reasonable for that. And it should be encouraged, exactly like what you said, to have as much urine diverted and as much nitrogen and phosphorus removed as quick as possible, as cheap as possible, and get those data. So even if, say, only waterless urinals would be installed, we get data. And then we can say, oh, instead of having 10 IAs, we have to do maybe 20 of these urinals. Well, then we get these data and we can make a decision of how to proceed with the least expensive, quickest way to remove the nitrogen. We are not into following Mass DEP rules of what to do because then we can wait for 20 years and have all polluted waters. We are into removing the nitrogen and phosphorus from our water. And that should be done as quick as possible, and I totally agree. And that is the proposal I sent you today. And I can send it to anybody who's interested. The different groups and how you compare. And the group that does nothing, that should be one group, and they should be studied. They should get their water meters in their house and keep all their flush toilets and measure everything that we would require to be measured with an IA. And then the group that removes all the human waste, like us, like an incinerator. That is one group, so you have the extremes, and then you know what you could achieve and what you don't achieve. And then anything in between is all data that we need to make the best decision the quickest way, and that's exactly what you mentioned, and that's what I sent the proposal. And I sent all the different ways we could do it. And we are really interested in having these 2 extremes, and then probably as the quickest way to get the most nitrogen out is to have waterless urinals and the QB, because that would be the least expensive and the most effective, and we probably get a lot of people for that. And then you could, if other people want to do the Postman or something else, you can do that too, of course. And then you get other data that are really important. Then you compare. Oh, that's 60% reduction, that's 50%, and then you can make a decision after a few years. But to do only one fixture and all the fixtures in the house and only one kind of fixture, I don't see that that's going to work.
Thank you. Good discussion. More comments?
Anything to add?
Yes.
Like I may just try to summarize where we are as a town. This committee and a working group that I was part of looked at the MassTech proposal, made some recommendations. We submitted that and the MassTech proposal to DEP a couple of months back. They told us we were in the queue for review. We haven't heard back, and I wouldn't hold my breath getting it. But what the town has decided, and this is town management and the Board of Selectmen, hearing the message that came from town meeting, they have approved money, they've approved an agreement with MassTech to develop the program. The input into that should be you folks, a member of this committee on behalf of the committee. But if you have these suggestions, I would recommend you get them to MassTech, probably the town manager for his edification and education. But the town has picked a direction to, as he said in his summation to the select board of the proposal, get Mass DEP approval as an IA system. Will urine diversion work and get urine out of the environment? Absolutely. It's proven science. We know it works. There's plenty of data. We don't need to really study that and get more data. The town's picked a direction that they are going to go. Give them your thoughts, give them your ideas via the town manager and MassTech, and see where it goes. But they've picked a direction and they've started, and they're against some very, very stringent time deadlines that are gonna be tough to meet. So it's an ongoing process, but the town has picked a direction and committed some funds to go forward.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to number 3. Vote to designate a urine diversion working group representative from this committee. Are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Steve Layton.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Are there any other nominations?
No, not for me.
I see how this is going.
Volunteered.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I promise to pass on everything that I have heard and remembered from this meeting. The next is reports of members and staff. John, did you want to finish?
Yeah, I had one brief report. At our last meeting, I think I reported and Amy Lowell amplified a meeting which we had with about 30 regulators several weeks ago, talking about our application for an outfall. And as a part of that, there was a group of people at DEP that were very interested in the technology that we were using to monitor eelgrass. The state has been monitoring eelgrass forever. It's usually done with aerial photography and then verified by divers. And it's a fairly expensive, probably, I would say, antiquated way of doing it. So what we've done is we have a colleague at the Oceanographic. They've developed these remotely operated vehicles that can just run a grid that would take days to do the old way that DEP's been doing it. They can do in 3 hours. And they use side scan, sonar, and photographs. So DEP has a hard time saying yes to something that's new. And so they wanted to send down the group of people at DEP who really were interested and were responsible for the eelgrass monitoring. So we had another meeting. They had one of their representatives came in person and 3 others attended remotely. And we went to Scott Gallagher's laboratory in North Falmouth and walked through in some detail how that technology works. And I think DEP realizes that this is really a quantum leap in how they can keep track of eelgrass beds. But they still, for instance, as we use the remote vehicle to do that, they still want us to verify what the vehicle is telling us by putting divers in the water. So at least until our study has been approved, we'll still be combining the old ways DEP has been doing things. But I would imagine in the future that there'll be an eelgrass program used in the state that will be done with these remote vehicles
John, I think you
exclusively.
should make a humorous YouTube with underwater photography of one of your divers being towed along by the autonomous vehicle on a walkie-talkie to the surface ships. And the robot says there's eelgrass, and the diver says, "Yep, there is." And this goes on for about a minute.
Anyway, I think that's where that's going, and I think it's quite positive.
That's exciting.
You know, when you get a bunch of DEP regulators, there are several that are, stuck. This is what we've always done, but that was quite encouraging. There was one that says, "Holy cow, this is the future." So I feel fairly positive that that will move in the right direction.
He's the guy using a flip phone, right?
Yeah.
Paul?
Just a quick question. The minutes of May 8th mentioned you attending that meeting, and you referred to it again. Can you elaborate what that meeting was and who attended that meeting?
Now, which meeting was this?
May
What are you
8th.
referring to about ocean outfall with the 30 or so people?
That was a meeting that was put together by the DEP, not DEP, our DPW. So our engineers, GHD and Amy Lowell, what we were trying to do is assemble anybody in the state who might be an interested party in us applying for an application for an outfall. So that as we develop a plan, we didn't want them to be able to say, well, you didn't. So once the Ocean Sanctuaries Act was changed in 2014, there has been no municipality that has applied for an ocean outfall. And of course, before 2014, they were specifically outlawed. So we're cutting absolutely new ground. And we were helped in 2017, the Coalition for Buzzards Bay put together a group of scientists, I don't know, there were 20-odd, I think, that wrote a white paper to the state that basically said, we as a group of scientists think that if a municipality is going to apply for an outfall, these are the criteria that we think they should have to answer successfully in order to get a successful application. And that's sort of the blueprint that we as a town are using to begin to put together a proposal. So we've done the physical oceanography of looking at the currents. We've had Jim Churchill at the Oceanographic has been using very sophisticated models that have been used all over the state and the East Coast, did all the Boston outfall monitoring. To do the physical oceanography for us, the town has let a contract to USGS to look at what the implications of an outfall might be on our sole source Sagamore aquifer. And we are putting together, with the help of the coalition and with GHD, all the monitoring which has to be done for 2 years before you begin, and then there'll be a monitoring schedule after you turned on the outfall. And those are fisheries, eelgrass, sediment types, informal animal, all sorts of things like that. And the coalition has actually set a buoy off of Kite Park and are doing the nutrient monitoring for us.
And there's a slide deck with 53 slides that came out of that meeting.
How many?
53 slides, so I can try to forward that to you. I think I can find it. And it gives you a pretty good idea of just how broad-based and far-reaching this whole analysis has been and is gonna be going forward. It's a pretty amazing project.
Steve?
I often provide that information to the planning board as a committee report of what the Water Quality Management Committee is doing, because they're intensely interested in what's going on. So, thank you.
At our last meeting, Paul, John, Amy gave a good report on what that meeting was all about, showed some of the slides, explained it. Our good friends from Buzzards Bay Coalition are partnering with this whole effort and doing a lot of great stuff with helping to define the approval paths and everything else. So, you know, or I can do it too. I know I downloaded all of those slides. I can send them to you. If you get the time to look at the meeting of, I think it was May 8th, when we had that report, and just that segment, and probably 10 minutes of John and Amy's reports on it. It was excellent, and it gave a lot of, I think, encouraging, important news of where we are and how we're gonna go forward, hopefully, with this. I would ask, John, did any other agency have questions or concerns brought back to the folks?
Basically, the objective of that that initial meeting where there were 40 regulators on the Zoom call was to say, we are planning to make an application from the town of Falmouth for an outfall. Here's the current set of where we think we are, and that was those 50 slides, which was put together by Amy Lowell and Scott Gallagher and Jim Churchill and GHD, that were presented to all those regulators. And the question was, please get back to us within 2 weeks if you think there are issues that you can see as regulators which we haven't thought of. So it was trying to get them to begin to put their arms around what we were doing and to think about whether we were approaching it in the best way.
No comments or questions have come in the 2-week time frame since that.
Those would have come to GHD and Amy Lowell.
Any other reports and members of staff?
I've got an item, if I may.
Go ahead.
Just for informational purposes, I had made a contact to the Nature Conservancy. And the reason I did that is in the presentations on the nitro system of a couple of meetings back, they had a nice list of links that you could click on to get more information. And I did that, and one of them led me to a bunch of information from the Nature Conservancy, who has been doing a lot of work on the Cape and all over the state and worldwide. I mean, this is a huge organization, heavily funded from what I can see. And specifically in that slide presentation that I got the link to, it mentioned a $100,000 grant that they had given to MassTech 2 years ago. And with that $100,000, MassTech was charged to come up with a review of alternative funding mechanisms beyond just the private homeowners for IA systems, whether it was public, private grants, federal funds, whatever, to help people that were facing the large expense of installing an IA. So I had reached out to MassTech, said, hey, did you have any results of that grant study? They did not reply. I reached out to Nature Conservancy and ended up speaking with their new executive director from Massachusetts. And she has had one of their staff people contact me, and I'll be having a phone dialogue with her next Wednesday to get up to speed with where they are on this and what help and resources and experience they have had as an organization, particularly on the Cape, but also anywhere in the country or the world, with addressing nitrogen pollution and water estuary impairment. So I will follow up with that and let you folks know. But I've reached out to them, and they're very responsive.
Part of that didn't make sense to me.
Okay.
The funding part. I mean, typically grants and things like that are for funding research or for pioneering study, but not for routine use of something. I mean, unless
It
it's
was-
social security or welfare or something,
Well,
or
it was,
SNAP or
it was-
groceries.
the grant was given to Mastec in funding them to,
But for them to find, I thought I heard you say, sources of funding for someone who needed to put in an IA.
correct, to
Right.
help.
But that's
offset
like
that
funding
cost.
for someone who needs to buy groceries.
Well, they wanted to do a detailed analysis of, things we've
I
just
mean,
been
the-
talking
don't
about.
get me wrong, the state could pass a law saying, we're gonna subsidize all IAs.
Mhm.
But it wouldn't be that the Nature Conservancy is, or the Red Cross or whatever is going to say, we're gonna pick 5 people at random in Massachusetts and pay for their IAs.
No, that's not what they're saying. They wanted to learn more about what opportunities there are to help, what other funding sources are there? Just as we as a community look for, is there federal, state tax grants, credits, whatever, to do our sewering? You know, we got a zero-interest loan from the Commonwealth revolving fund for the Little Pond sewering. So it was a subsidy from the state basically saying, hey, we'll give you 0% money for 30 years
Okay.
to help alleviate the cost that Falmouth would incur. The charge to Mastec, according to the grant synopsis I read, was just a one-sentence thing, said to explore the alternate funding opportunities for IAs. If we as a committee and the town and the Board of Health say, thou shalt put an IA in the next 10 years in all these areas that are not going to be sewered, okay, what incentives, subsidies, support would we or somebody else give to those homeowners that have to install an IA? That's part of what I think we'll be looking at as we say when and how many and what type of IA you will need to put in. People will say, well, cripe, I can't afford it. Are you gonna help pay for it just like the town paid 30% of the sewering costs for the main lines and everything else in Little Pond, and will probably do for the other sewering areas? So that was the charge, and I'm saying, well, this is something we're looking at. What'd you find? Did this grant get spent? Was there a report issued? And that's kind of where I'm scratching in to find as much as I can to pass on to the committee as to what's out there. How are other communities, states dealing with the IA issue? We're faced with doing something about our estuaries. We know we're gonna do a bunch of sewering. We know we got aquaculture. We're looking at permeable reactive barriers. We're looking at probably having mandated IAs in the other areas. Are we as a town going to subsidize that to some extent using state revolving loan money? Are there state, federal, private grants available to help that? That's what they're looking at. And okay, well, what have you found? I don't wanna go looking for something you've already researched. Let's not reinvent the wheel, as I like to say. So I've made an outreach. I've got a positive response from Makila Bowman, the new executive director. It's not Makila, Manika Bowman. And she said, I'll have my people that are in this get back to you. I got an email today from one of their people that deals with Cape Cod and deals with Mastec on this issue, and we will converse next week. And I will report back to the committee as to what, if anything, I learned.
Thank you. Before anybody else leaves, there were many good comments from the audience dealing with the urine diversion. If you could put those in an email to the committee email address so that I have them in writing, I would appreciate it. And if you know any of the people that left, if you could tell them to do the same, I'd most appreciate it. Any other reports of members and staff?
I just wanted to chime in that Corin looked up, Falmouth has 280 IA systems.
How many?
That makes.
280.
280.
Yeah.
3,600.
That other number
Wide.
was way too high.
The 1,200 was probably the Cape a while back after George took out the bad numbers that John was referring to.
Yeah, so I just went on the Barnstable County Health website and grabbed
Those are the
that
things I
number.
wanted to just kind of say, and amounts. Just for anyone that might be interested, Kim has left, but I thought he might mention it. The Pond Advisory Group, which was recently formed by the Select Board, and the members, he tells me, Kim, that the final ones were sworn in last week. They will have their first meeting on the 6th of June at 7 o'clock downstairs in the Civil Defense Conference Room down near where the Conservation Committee is. That office area downstairs in the basement. So, you know, that's an important group, newly formed, something that I know a lot of people on this committee recommended, hey, there's issues with the ponds in this community that need to be addressed, and it's beyond the purview and the mandate for this committee to look at. Basically, we're saltwater there, somebody's gotta look at these ponds that are in trouble. There's a committee formed, they're gonna have their first meeting on the 6th of June, so anybody is welcome to attend. It's a public meeting, obviously.
Do you hear him?
I'm done.
Oh, Hilda had a comment.
I have a quick comment. Quick. The Green Center is going to have another tour on June 1st at 1:30. If anybody's interested, write us at thegreencenterinc@gmail.com, and we send you all the information. It's free. You can see urine diversion toilets in use already for more than 10 years, eco toilets for more than 20, and we'll give you any information that you might need related to it. So June 1st at 1:30 on a Saturday at Green Center, thegreencenterinc.com.
Hildy, don't you also have an event at the,
Yes,
what
there's,
is coming up in June?
yes, there's one at Webner on May the 30th at 6 o'clock. I think it starts at 6:30, the doors open at 6:50, something like that. And that's a urine diversion workshop that they give. So Brian will be speaking, we will be speaking, and then there will be a panel of homeowners that have eco-toilets or urine diversion. So people can ask questions out there. And then there's also one, the Cape Coastal Conference. What
June
date is it?
6th.
18th of June. That's a whole day, and we will be part of that, as well as Brian of Mastec, as well as Abe Noyes Hayes from Rich Earth Institute from Vermont. And we probably will have a table there. Hopefully you can combine our table with information for all the conference participants.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yes,
Oh,
so.
we have to
Minutes?
read the minutes, yeah.
Oh, we haven't done the
oh,
minutes, the
sorry.
most important part. I'll move the minutes be approved as presented.
Second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Kristen, is it